This is the Ink Pray Love podcast. We talk all things health, wealth, and community connection. Let's go. Welcome back to the Ink Pray Love podcast. We are here at LightHouse Studios in Bali, and I'm here with a longtime friend of mine and someone who's helped me through a lot of difficult, crazy, wild, intense situations in my life. This is my friend Richard Maule. He is... Can you explain what you do? Because I don't want to butcher this. I know what you are for me, but please, thank you for coming, first of all. And what do you do in life?
Well, one of the things I do is I'm a spiritual coach. I help people to commit to a large vision, to dream big. And often the thing I found as I worked in this industry for like the last 6 years is the biggest thing was commitment. And so I help them commit to that level, and then we create this kind of powerful relationship that I invite them into. When we have this powerful relationship, there's presence, there's trust, there's commitment, and there's a shit ton of love. And then when that's there, and they have that, and I have that, there's like this third space that's created. And in that third space, everything can change. That big vision they thought they couldn't do because they were playing small and they were being someone, that was small. When you create that relationship, that third space, it creates a space where they can grow into something more that can create that incredible vision. So I work with people like that. 6 12-month agreements. Like, it's like I get married to like 8 people. You know what I mean? Like, I love those close relationships.
I mean, coming from Ubud, it's a lot of that. Anyways.
Yeah,
different context. Sorry.
Yeah.
When we were working together, this was around COVID time, and I remember it was a strange kind of situation for me. I didn't really know what to do next. I was in a strange transition period. And there's a lot of helpful wisdom that you put me through, especially with the hypnotherapy and the NLP. But when I had my motorcycle accident, that's when I felt we had our most powerful session yet. And I think I told the story before on the episode about the near-death experience, but having you on here to talk about it and what we went through, I remember leaving the hospital and they carried me out of my wheelchair into the taxi, and I realized, okay, I'm like pretty much a baby at this point. Like, I can't move on my own. Arms broken, both my legs are broken. I'm gonna have to be carried around, or then wheeling myself in my little motorized wheelchair that Dave bought me. When I was in the taxi on the way home, and a motorcycle passed, and I felt the vibration go by, and I was like, ooh, my whole body like shivered, and I felt that. I was like, oh, that's going to be an issue. Like, that's it. Even before that, when I was sitting in the hospital bed and I was scrolling on Instagram when my friends gave me my phone back, AJ finally gave me my phone back. And I remember seeing, like, I followed a bunch of Ducati pages because I had a Ducati, and I saw my motorcycle, and I was like, oh, like I felt this like in my body reaction, and I was like, that's trauma. Like, I'm no stranger to trauma. I know that's a very strong sensation coming through now, and of course it's very close to the accident, so it's going to be quite like this, of course, but I also knew I'm going to need to work on this. Like, I know I'm going to need to do a lot of things around this because I can feel it in my body. And for the first few months, but especially when I finally got home from the hospital and my body was trying to fall asleep, I would shake and I would jerk. And so I'd be like just getting into that like slow, okay, maybe I could possibly fall asleep and the pain subsiding. And then I would just shoot, especially my legs that had been broken. And that was crazy. And I was like, I'm going to need to work on this. But I knew this was trauma in my, like, it was psychological. Of course, it's in my body as well. But I knew, having worked with you and many other amazing teachers, I was like, you're going to have to work on this. And so I was like, okay, breath work, sure. But I need to like understand what I'm going through, and also the way I was feeling about the situation right at that point was pretty dire. Like, I felt like I was trying not to be a victim. I had a lot of eyes on me, and my friends were there for me, and I knew like I was gonna handle this well. I made a decision, like, make yourself proud how you handle this. Like, when I was in the hospital, I made a decision right when it happened, after my first surgery, was like, handle this in a way you're gonna be proud later. And I like committed to that. I was like, just promise me that, Aren, And when I was thinking about the accident, though, I would still have this really deep, like, oh, fuck, I can't believe that happened to me. Like this, like, poor me almost. Like it was in the essence of a victim type of mentality. I wasn't trying to blame the world. I was not, but I knew I wasn't coming at it right because every time I'd think of the accident, I would shudder. I would feel small. And when we did our session together, and you had me through this process that I never done before, but we did this reverse kind of rewind situation, and you told me, okay, go back to where you were before the accident happened that same day, someplace that you were safe. And I was at Karma House, I was at my business, and I remember it clearly because there was an inquiry from like a Russian dance teacher or something about the space upstairs, and the manager introduced her to me. Oh, here's the owner, by the way. And I was like, oh, hello. Like I was doing a couple things, but I just remember that exact moment. That was the first thing I thought of was when I was like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. And that came through. And then you're like, now go tell yourself what's going to happen, but from the point that you're going to be okay. And I was like, oh, so how would I explain that to myself? And you're like, tell me, how would you explain it to yourself? So I had to like verbalize this really, like I had to really go there. And that I found that really helpful because it made me do it. Otherwise I'd be like, yeah, you're gonna be okay, buddy. It's like, no, tell me, say it. I was like, okay. And so then I pictured myself walking up to me in my business, like me, I'm just around the corner waiting for that conversation to finish. Like, hurry this up. I got something to tell you. I'd be like, hey, listen, you're going to be in an accident tonight and you're almost going to die. It's going to be really serious. You're going to break both your legs, your pelvis, your elbow, your Achilles, your bladder. It's not your fault, but that's what's going to happen. But luckily, you're going to keep your shit together. You're going to get yourself help. You're going to give 5 or 6 Indonesian people jobs in Indonesian while you're in shock and there's bone sticking out of your leg and you're bleeding from your severed perennial artery in your leg. You could bleed to death, but you found yourself help and you saved your own life. So, like, you're going to be okay, buddy. It's going to suck, but you're going to make it out of this alive. And then I had to, like, listen to that. Oh, shit. Okay. And then you had me run through the situation. And then we did it in reverse. And then I believe we did it in like a different voice or something. I'd love for you to explain that because this has been a few years now. But I just remember when we finished that session, that one session, I felt like a huge weight lifted off of me, like a massive weight. It was like, holy shit, this feeling of like, fuck, this happened to me, to like, wow, like you actually handled that. You handled yourself well there. You can be proud of yourself there. Like, good man. And instantly, like, my healing started improving, my emotions started improving. I right away, just, it was a big turning point for me. So I was really in the depths of it. Like, it was hard adjusting to being handicapped, especially when you're a mover shaker trying to get around and now you can't get off the toilet by yourself. It was a hard adjustment, and it was getting the best of me a little bit, for the first couple of weeks, especially with the pain levels the first couple of weeks. So getting in and out of bed was excruciating. And I remember multiple times, like, man, this sucks. Like, I'm not okay. And after that moment, I remember being like, no, you're a badass. This sucks, but you're a badass. It's okay. Explain, to everybody listening, how does that work? What's the science behind it, or how do we intellectualize what you did for me?
Yeah.
And also, thanks.
Well, as you were saying that, it's lovely kind of sharing that story again and helped me to really drop into this moment really fully with you, because I remember it and it was not a small thing.
Yeah.
It was pretty fucking huge.
Yeah.
And I can't believe you are where you are now. Beg your pardon. So yeah, let me break down a few little pieces there. So there's this technique, one of the names is called the rewind technique. And it comes from NLP, from Richard Maule and John Grindler from a long time ago. And the simple idea is that when something traumatic, so this is specifically for trauma, it's very powerful. And the idea is that when there's a trauma, if you imagine there's kind of like there's a line going along, and that's just your existence. And you're going along, and then what happens is there's like this bam trauma that happens. And then it's like, oh, if you survived, you carry on. But the issue arises when people don't realize that bam, a separate line was created. There was like a separate consciousness that did not survive. But it did survive in your head. The moment was so extreme, it kind of thought like it died and it's caught in the loop. And that's the part of you that gets triggered when that bike goes by. So what do? We want to update the system. So one way is to go back to that traumatic time and go back to the beginning. Go back to that that kind of siphoned off consciousness that doesn't know that you survived and is just in fight or flight, panic, the accident's happening again and again. I want to go and speak to that part. So that's what we did. How do we do that? Well, we can remember. So remembering is bringing together lots of different parts. So I helped you do that. It forms in the memory. You're in Karma House. There's the Russian dancer, and it's brought together. We use lots of things like what can you hear, what can you taste, what can you touch. What that does is it creates more neuroplasticity again. It invites you to be able to shift the memory again, brings it out of the vault. Then we introduce new information. That's you in your current state now. And I had to really get you to that place so that was the other piece we had to look at. There's a nice distinction. We'll come back to this in a minute after the trauma discussion. The technique is as victim versus owner. So I had to get you from victim to owner to make a choice to go back and say to the guy, it's different. So you go back to old Aren and you see him, he finishes the conversation. You say, hey, buddy, you're going to be okay. You're going to survive. In fact, you're a fucking badass because you're getting help for it. You're resolving this. You're still moving forwards. You're doing the therapy. You've got a team around you. So adding in that element of pride, but inner pride, not outer pride of other people judging you. So this kind of locus of control. I am the owner of my destiny. So we do that. And there's lots of pieces. And I don't know if you remember, but we repeated it. So we don't overload the system, that consciousness. We give it one piece at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One piece at a time. So, okay, the first bit, go back, go tell him you're going to be in an accident. How much more capable are we of moving through an uncomfortable situation if we know we're going to be okay? That's like the number one issue is like
Safety.
Uncertainty, safety. If you know you're going to be okay, then also you then perform better in that situation. If you take it on a macro level, life, we're constantly going, am I going to be okay? And a part of coaching and the spiritual journey is going, it will pass. It's okay. Come back to the moment. So we repeated that. You cycle it through. And what happens is it starts to dissolve, dissipate this consciousness that was formed. And as it dissipates, all those new learnings come through. You move up the levels of consciousness and you get to more places of acceptance and compassion for self. And along that raising of consciousness, you might have some other ones like anger, sadness come up, but then I invited you to be present with those and just let them go.
Yeah. It was quite a process.
Yeah.
I didn't think looking at a situation and reframing it, I knew that, of course it's a powerful thing. It's how we, look at everything in our lives and our perspective, but running through it in that way, that fast, was crazy liberating. So the safety aspect, and I feel like I understand that because when I was like coming to Bali in the first place and, leaving my old lifestyle and wanting to come out here, and it was like, well, what if you fail everything? What if you lose everything? I think it'll be fine. Like, you'll be okay. You'll figure it out. And that was like my saving grace for making the risk, for like leaving everything I had, selling everything I had, and coming out here somewhere where I didn't really know anybody or didn't know the language. And, I'd never had a legitimate business to go for it. It was like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to die. Like, you'll be okay. I think that was the same situation after the accident. It's like, well, you didn't die. It's like, well, all right, you'll be okay. You'll figure it out, right? what's the link between letting go of the trauma and seeing it and then healing in the body and also healing in the mind? What does it do for us, clarity wise, performance?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about a question asking you what your physical experience was. I'm curious, what was your physical experience from the session, and how quickly did you notice any physical transformations?
I mean, it was a fucking roller coaster. I had surgeries consistently, and my leg rebroke. Remember that?
Yeah, and infection as well.
And the infection.
Yeah.
It was no walk in the park. Literally.
Nice big beard.
Yeah, I remember how big my beard was.
Remember the sessions? You'd have to like get into a position so you could sit. And...
Yeah. It was a lot of work. I'd be having to get comfortable for the sessions or get into bed and prop myself in. It was a lot of work. It was quite a difficult time.
Yeah.
And I feel like once though I was able to emotionally feel better about it, my will to like do these things was much better. Like, fuck man, I remember the first time I got home and the first time I had to get into bed. And my buddy Brian Kelly, he lived across the street, and God bless him, he was helping me like get off the toilet, get into bed. Like one of my best friends out here, he really was there for me. And the first time he helped me get into bed, I kind of scooched my butt onto the bed. He picked me up like a baby, like under my armpits, and like picked me up, put me onto the bed. And then I had to like swing my legs onto the bed. And when I swung my first right leg, I had this new metal plate in my pelvis, and the metal plate went and it made this noise, and it hurt, but the noise was so unnerving for me. I broke down and started crying. Right away. That was the first and kind of one of, I didn't have too many breakdowns, but that was the first one. And especially like in front of another friend, like it was embarrassing for me, but I couldn't help it. And I also knew it was a safe space. Brian's my bro. We did lots of crazy deep work together, and like, I don't really give too much of a shit, but I just remember being like, fuck, is this going to be my life? Like that's why I was actually like really upset. The pain, whatever. I had been in tons of pain. It's okay. But the thought of like, is this what my pelvis is going to sound like forever? Like it hit me like a truck, and I just broke down and started crying. And I was just like, fuck man, like this is so hard. Like this is crazy. And he consoled me. He's like, you'll be okay. And he helped me pick my other leg up. We got into bed, and that was the first time. And it doesn't still make that noise, thank God. And it only did for about 6 months, but still, it's a long time to be like, is my pelvis always going to make this noise when I like move? And then after we did our sessions and I started getting more comfortable with like how I feel about these things and how I think about them really determines, how I move and how much I want to heal, or how much I'm looking forward to having these people come through and work on me, or how actively I'm seeking help. That was actually the big thing. It was like, how actively am I actually reaching out to you to do sessions? Or am I actually, I had lots of friends who are amazing world-class healers and coaches. Like, so I'm very, very lucky with the friends group I have. A lot of my friends, they're epic humans. But I also had to make sure I made an effort to like, hey, can you come by today? Like, just give me a hand. Like I had to like make sure I do that. But if I didn't feel good about my situation, I noticed I was much less likely to actually like, hey, I could use a hand. I wouldn't have to be like, I need your help, I'm hurting. I could frame it in a way that was a little bit more okay for me, but I wouldn't do it. I would be more reclusive. But when I started looking at myself with a bit more of, as you said, like a bit more ownership, I could actually, okay, this is my responsibility to feel better about it. I would actually go and get the help. And it made a world of difference. I don't know why that's our pattern as humans, often, especially men. But if we're not feeling great about the situation, we'll just turtle, and not want to actually get help. And women too, there's so many of us. And whereas actually getting that help takes so much of the pressure off. Yeah, what's that all about?
Well, there's so many things you say that resonate in my story too.
I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah. So, so you're saying about, the mental state of mind and how it affects the physical state, and how have physical pain, physical issues, and then try and escape it by going inside ourselves and isolating. And I think it can happen even more with men and people that are very self-reliant, a bit more dismissive, avoidant, hyper-independent. I know that's what can happen with me, a pattern I have to watch out for, and from what you shared as well.
Totally.
And I think men lean more towards that, more don't reach out for help. And there's a lovely thing that Stutz says in the film documentary with Jonah Hill. He's a therapist of Jonah Hill. Don't know if you've seen it. It's a great.
I've heard of it. I was going to try to watch it. Our friend Anne was telling us to get into
great.
it. Yeah.
And he says that vulnerability is our beacon, the light saying to society, to civilization, to people, like, I need help. Vulnerability. And so it's having that vulnerability with ourselves to go, I feel weak. Brian, I need help. Or this friend, I need help. And it can be really, really fucking hard to do that when, especially if you're a very self-reliant person. And when you get to those places where you've had an accident with a truck, you don't have a choice. And then a part of you that you don't want to accept, which is a part of you that wants to give up. And I'm speaking about myself here, but also just from what we've spoken about. A part of you that wants to give up, a part of you that feels weak, a part of you that wants to ask for help. There are all these parts in us, at least for some people, and they're like our shadow part. And we're like, I don't want to deal with that. And so actually we often choose, because it's very uncertain again. Well, if I reach out to people, will they come? If I take these risks, will it pay off? Or instead, I'll choose a more certain, clearer path, which is be a victim. Go in that shell, like you said, curl up, and just start kind of beating myself up and distancing myself, not sending that beacon out to the world, which is the most courageous, brave thing. I read a book to my daughter many nights. It's called, you probably know, it's the Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Beautiful book. And it's a book full of wisdoms with these different animals going on their journey. And the boy says to the horse, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? And the horse, who's a very wise being, says, ask for help. So I think so much of it is about, especially if you feel very self-reliant and we're business people, you're focused on professions, and it's about firstly recognizing the pattern, owner or victim. Am I going for something that's certain but not going to be helpful for my life, but it's a clearer path, feels safer in some weird paradoxical way that we all do? Or am I going to be an owner and choose a more challenging path, which is what you did, which is show up. I saw you do the physio every day, reach out to people, be vulnerable, ask for help, look like you're just feeble and, maybe you're always going to piss your pants. You need to ask for someone to help you to the toilet, or you're a catheter, and making that choice. And then letting go of anything that isn't in ownership, anything that's victim, just letting go, like you did in front of Brian, just crying, letting go. And maybe we can talk more about it, but that's definitely, I had a similar journey, physically and emotionally.
I'd love to hear about your journey about that. Absolutely. Please share.
So, yeah, we have our daughter who's almost 2.5 now, Rumi. And when she was about 3 months old, I'd been helping out a lot. I'd constructed a life where I could be a very present dad and partner. And 3 months went by. Jade had a C-section. There was like 5-day labor. He had a C-section in the end. So I was very involved. It was all great. And then it got to about 3 months and I went to an osteo in Bali. And it was just to kind of get an old niggle sorted out. Didn't think much of it. And it felt a bit weak afterwards. She said, it's fine. It's probably just, recalibrating. Next thing I know, my back is getting quite bad. And cut to, 3 months down the line, I'm not picking Rumi up. My back is shot and I have so much fear around my back. You know what it can be like with the back, so much worry and fear it's going to freeze up again. And it came from nothing and I couldn't figure it out. And I was doing 3 hours of physio every day. I was getting a physiotherapist to come in, and every day doing 2 hours. I was stretching, before I got up to be with Rumi at like 4 in the morning, and I was doing everything, and I was just at a loss. I was like, what the fuck am I going to do? And I couldn't pick my daughter up. I couldn't help how I wanted. And that created so much pressure in our home. And for Jade and I, really, 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 really hard. Hardest time of my life. And so much of me at some point wanted to go into a depression. I'd have moments where I was like, just go into my room after leaving them. And I remember lying on the bed and just wanting just to sink into it. And it was just because I had the tools, the skill sets, the mindset from what I do, the meditation practices, all these different things we talked about. And I just willfully I just kind of brought myself up out of the bed and just brought myself back into the moment, and had that choice of victim or owner in this moment. And there's this small part of us, the ego or the smaller self, that really feeds off. It's like, yeah, give me some of that sadness. We all feel it. It almost feels good.
Yeah.
And I made that choice. And it was hard. I had to make the choice over and over again. And bringing it to the physical and mental connection, I finally figured out, I was like, this must be emotional. Well, it was my wife, actually. She's like, it must be emotional. So I remembered this book someone had suggested, and it was called, I think, Healing Back Pain by Dr. Sano. And I thought, okay, I'll try this book. And I had a look at the reviews, and suddenly something started to happen inside of me as I was reading these reviews of the book. There's like thousands and thousands of reviews, and they're all just like life-changing reviews, just amazing. Even ones where people were like very left-brain and would doubt that the book had worked, but then they would then go on to say, but my back's better. And so amazing results. So I said to Jade, it was a Sunday, I'm going to come home. Can I have some time? I'm going to read this book. So she said, yeah. So I sat in my bedroom, and it was Sunday, it was 12 p.m. and I read this book. I started reading it. And as I was reading, I'm kind of meditating while I'm reading, and I noticed something starting to happen. It's like something started to come up. So I put the book down, I go and sit at the edge of the bed, just close my eyes, and it just starts coming. I just start crying and just body shaking and just letting go. So this method is not so specific as the rewind technique. It's more just being in presence and letting go, which you 100% can learn. So I'm letting go, and then I stop, go back to the book, start reading the book again. At some point, more stuff starts to come out. Okay, put the book down, go to the edge of the bed again, letting go. And at some point, I get to a part in the book, and we can talk more about what the book talks about, because it's probably very applicable to people listening. And again, people that are very hyper independent and work focused and successful. And it says often these types of people will have had this, and sexual abuse. And as I read that, just something inside, like a hammer, something just dropped. I thought, what is that? I'd never thought that had happened at all. Put the book down, sat at the edge of the bed, and it just started coming. Like the feelings, the sensations just came up, and the sounds that came out of me, I've never experienced anything like it. Just like a deep, primal, visceral sounds, and it felt pre-verbal. That's what it felt like. And just the sadness and the everything. It was so overwhelming. And we can talk more about this method, because I think it'd be a useful tool for people to come away with. Just letting go, and not getting involved in any of the story. As I'm letting go, I start to have two things happen. There's a sense inside of me that I had been sexually abused, and there was conscious confusion. The fuck, like, what? It doesn't make sense. But I've done this long enough to know, don't get involved, just watch, and it will unfold. Let go of all the small self, and clarity and truth will arise. So I'm letting go. As I'm letting go, and this insight's come of, I've been sexually abused, this memory came in. And it was a memory of a silhouette of a woman. I woke up at night time and there was this woman and there was a party happening outside and it wasn't my bedroom and it just felt very strange. I woke up and it felt very uncomfortable. And that memory came in while I was sitting on the bed on that Sunday. And suddenly it clicked. I'd had that memory maybe 3 or 4 times in my life, but I just dismissed it because I thought, what's that? It's just a strange memory. It has no context for me at all. And I'd repressed, which is where it doesn't even come into consciousness. It just goes straight down. You have no awareness of it. And that had caused a lot of repression of anger, anxiety, and fear. And again, repression isn't suppression. Suppression is where you're conscious of it and you decide. Repression is where it goes straight under. And that had caused my back. All this kind of repressed tension. And we can go into it more another time, or people can read the book of why that happens and how that happens physiologically. But as I let all that go, and it lasted for 9 hours, from 12 p.m. till 9 p.m.
Wow.
In between, I went out and Jade saw me and I was just this mess. And I told her, I think I've been sexually abused. And we had this beautiful moment where we cried together and she supported me beautifully. And then went to bed the next day. I hadn't picked Rumi up for 8 months. I went and picked her up, took her for a swim, and me and Jade were just crying and crying because I hadn't been able to help. I hadn't been able to pick up my daughter, and that was so painful.
Wow.
And yeah, just in that moment, just changing everything that was happening in the mind and repressed emotions and memories and just letting go, I healed my back in 9 hours.
Amazing.
And it was fine. And it's always been fine since then.
Wow.
Mind blowing.
That's crazy. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Can you give me the cliff notes on why we repress though? I'm really curious about that.
Why we repress?
Yeah.
So again, this is my understanding. There's lots of other ways of looking at it. Is that it is something within ourselves. If you think of Jungian psychology and the shadow, there are shadow parts of ourselves that we do not want to accept. And so there were things, so in my story, everyone's is different. I'll be interested to know yours in a minute. My shadows, some of them I had to be a nice guy. I had to be Mr. Perfect, perfect partner, perfect husband, perfect dad. So I couldn't have any part of me that wanted to give up, that could be angry. And when you're a young dad and you've got a wife who has big emotions and she has some trauma to process too, and our daughter has very big emotions, she's very sensitive, not in a bad way, just, that obviously there were probably moments I was getting angry. There were moments that I was struggling. But one thing is that I had was I'd never give up. Never give up. So it was actually accepting, paradoxically in myself, I can give up. I can take a bit of a break from the family. Like I wouldn't take time because I feel guilty. And so it was like, you can. It's okay, you're human. Take a break. You can feel angry. You don't have to be Mr. fucking calm all the time. Like I'm actually a very fiery person. I'm realizing more and more and more. And so really just accepting who I was. And when I do that, then those emotions and feelings and thoughts are acceptable. And when they're acceptable, I'm now a human. And what it really brought about, it was a very challenging time in my life. It meant I could see what I wasn't accepting in myself, how that was showing up in the results it was giving in my life, and making it way harder than it needed to be, even though I was successful in all areas really. And then it's a much more easeful life. It's a much more open life, you talk about heart opening. I'm just much more loving, connected in all areas. So it's become the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me. I'm so grateful for it. I honestly mean that. It's just, I even feel emotional talking about it. And I want that more for people. And it's taken my coaching to a whole new level.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm curious, have you got any areas, if you want to share, that you have shadow parts that you have worked through and how that's affected?
How fucking long we got,
let's
bro.
extend it to 2 hours. Here we go. Settle in, guys. What are like the top 1 or 2 that really, when you accepted them, totally either changed things physically for you, and your life?
There's a lot around image. There's a lot there around image.
Yeah.
And it was a big one for me, especially with like place in society or how I'm being perceived, needing to be the cool guy or this or that. It was mainly a protection mechanism, growing up and being bullied and being yelled at and hurt and all these things, that there was this hard external layer that got built as a protection mechanism. And it was just like needing to let go of the fact that like you're under fire, or that like you need to toughen up, or you're gonna get victimized or bullied or something like that, or you're not doing it right, or you're not a fast runner, growing up, like all these little things that were like niggling in me. On one end, it would make me want to overachieve, in other areas. So I think there was like a positive aspect to the compensation, but also then it was leading into many addictive behaviors, like many, many, many addictive behaviors. And letting go of the fact that I needed to really overdo it is still a work in progress. Definitely, it's not an easy one for me. But I'm seeing around that if I'm able to just be, and not have to like try so hard, I can get to a place where I can accomplish more. But that's a difficult one. It's not easy.
How's it difficult? How do you experience it when those moments come up and you have that kind of choice, and how you feel it in your body? What's that like?
It's funny because it's right down. It's a lot around substance abuse, I find, because even down to like, should I have a coffee before this interview? You know what I mean? Like these type of things where I'm like, well, I wasn't like pinged as I'd usually be on most of like these podcast episodes. I would usually either be on kratom or, 2 or 3 coffees in. By the time I'd get here, I'd have one as soon as I wake up, and then I'd have another one before the interview, and it was really using a lot because I wouldn't feel like I'd be enough, I wouldn't be sharp enough, or I wouldn't be funny enough, or I wouldn't be as lucid, whatever it is, maybe I'll be dull. And then I had to sit with that and be like, you'll be just fine. Like, you'll be enough. You can show up and have a good conversation. You don't need to be pinged and wired off, stimulating, substances. You'll be okay. And I had to like really make friends with that and see that like, you'll be okay. Like, you're not gonna fuck it up. You'll be all right. I had a cup of tea this morning. I'm not, like, and I had my first coffee in a few weeks now, and that was it. And I was like, that's not too bad. Like, that'll be kind of more or less the day. Whereas before it was quite a bit. So there was that. I think a lot of it's around the performance, and focus. And what's going to have me really switched on. So there was that end of it. I'm sure there's many, many, many more areas that I'm still like working through. But ones that I've worked on, trust.
Can I ask, you said dull, so there's performance, focus, and then there's being dull. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to have quite a lot of weight. Yeah. So what did being dull mean? And how did you reframe that in your mind?
It's a tough one because growing up, I was a gifted student and they were going to put me, ahead grades. I was going to be, they wanted me to put me into like a private school or a school for gifted kids when I had the choice between going from elementary school to high school. So that was where I was doing pretty good. And then I started getting concussions at a young age at ice hockey. I get 1 concussion each season for 6 years in a row. I don't know why the fuck I stayed in hockey for that long, but I had 6 concussions by the time I was 18. And also when I was 12, 13, the first year of high school, we found my best friend's dad's marijuana grow up. And so he was our neighbor, like a block away. And he was my t-ball coach growing up, my baseball coach growing up. So like we knew him very well. His dad was like, a baseball coach in the community, a nice guy, kind of a hippie, wrote music, but he also grew a ton of weed in his basement. And so I remember finding that at 13 years old with, my best buddy. He's like, I gotta show you something. And I'm like, what? He walks me into the room. I'm like, what the fuck is all this? Like tinfoil on all the walls, these Christmas trees.
All just growing.
Yeah, huge trees, lights hanging from the ceiling. You're like, what the fuck? It's the best and worst thing to happen to a kid in East Vancouver because you're like,
you're only 13.
Yeah, 13. Now we have unlimited free weed that we can sell and trade for alcohol, and so it was like instant access, plus brain injuries. So, so it's not exactly like a stimulating environment for your brain. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not good for you. And I started developing ADHD at that age. I remember around, and I also started getting really seriously bullied. So I had a real serious emotional trauma at that age. It was hard. There was a bunch of older. I moved to a new school, and there was a bunch of older brown dudes that decided they hated me because I dated one of their ex-girlfriends unknowingly. I just got to that school. It was my first real girlfriend. I was a fat kid, so I finally got like a girlfriend as a fat chubby kid. This was like really cool for me. It turned out I dated the wrong girl. One of the older guys in the big group of brown guys, and I wasn't brown enough. You know, I grew up on the other side of town. I didn't speak very good Punjabi, and they were, you know, came from maybe a little bit more traditional families, so they looked down on me for a few reasons. But I was also, you know, a chubby little fat kid, and I dated the wrong girl, one of their exes. So they had it out for me, and they made sure they tried to make my life hell like many, many times. It was really shitty. And so I was going through like a lot of things at once that were quite difficult. And I remember school getting quite a bit harder. So then my grades went from like easy A's and B's to C pluses and B's. You know, it was, and I didn't really want to try. I'd be smoking weed. I'd be, you know, trying to rebel and try to, you know, hang out with the tough kids so I wouldn't get bullied. And so I remember not feeling as sharp. And then I remember not getting the approval from my parents. And then I remember, you know, just not feeling like I was that kid I was when I grew up. And this was like a really weird time for me because I didn't feel like I had this brain power, and I had constant headaches from the concussions, and my memory was starting to skip, and I was starting to forget people's names. And I remembered like my brain wasn't working very well. And this really messed with my self-worth issues because growing up in elementary school, I was in the top 3 of any class I'd be in. You know, I was a gifted student. And then now I was like chubby fat kid getting bullied without getting good grades, and you know, it was like, now what? And so I remember hating high school, hated it, because it was just like, is this going to be my life? Like, this sucks. And I couldn't wait to get out. I just couldn't wait to not be around these people. And then that's when, you know, I started kickboxing. When I got out of high school, started wanting to be a bit shifting to overcompensate from that. So then money and status would take me out of that loop. Because then when I tried to go to university or school, I still couldn't do school. Like sitting there in a classroom and studying was a challenge for me. It really was hard to focus. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't that easy. I still have a difficult time actually focusing. But luckily, I was able to find some practices that were able to help me like get some things done and make it easy for someone with pretty bad attention issues, you know. But the dullness is something that comes along with really low brain function, and then low moods and low self-worth. And I feel like that's why I love to be like sharp, and anything that would get me an edge, I would want it, so I could be a bit sharper and get things done faster and move quicker than anyone else, in the sense of like executing on things and building things. Like I would love doing that, and I would love to hit it hard and get it done quick. And so there's a strange thing there for me in performance, I'd say.
Yeah, we go to these extremes, don't we?
Totally.
We don't want to feel the certain thing, the dullness, and see where that takes us. What would happen if we moved through the dullness and let it go and allowed that, and to bring it back to the shadows, accepted that sometimes I can be dull. What happens if I'm okay with that? Actually, that's not very dull. If someone, you ever met someone, like I know I have, they don't feel like they have to be interesting. And they could have really like calm energy, they're not talking much, then sometimes they could be, but they don't feel like they have to be anything. So it's like, can I accept my dullness? When I can accept my dullness and bring it fully back in, like I did with my nice guy, Mr. Perfect, all that stuff, a bit like there's like a consciousness that separated you in the trauma. If we go back to the rewind technique, there was a consciousness that separated from you, almost felt like it didn't survive that concussion, the drug use, the brown guys bullying you, you know, all that stuff. Can you say it's okay, come back home, you're safe, it's going to be okay? It's just a different route to Rome, you know, it's a different way. And then when we do that, something really interesting arises. There's a beingness if you allowed yourself to be dull, I think I'd find that really interesting. You know what I mean? It's pretty rare. So it's in accepting those shadow parts that we talked about in both of our experiences that make us just humans. And I feel way more of a human, even during this conversation at the beginning, a little less human, trying to be something a little bit. And then as I get more comfortable and I connect with you fully, and I feel like I don't have to be interesting, and I'm just myself, really cool shit arises. Like right now, there's like a real connection that's really interesting.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Where are you seeing your practice shift, and going from when we first started, it was more around NLP and hypnotherapy. And then now I've seen you shift more into spiritual coaching. Where's the link in the results that you're seeing with your clients, and also the shift in how you're acting in your practice?
Yeah. So actually I'll kind of reframe. I would say actually I'd separate it out. And I said spiritual coach, probably because I was just a bit nervous at the beginning, is coach and spiritual teacher. These are just words, obviously, but it's important because coach is, if you think about an athlete, it's encouragement, it's love, it's stretching the goal. How far can you go? So that's very much what I do. It's keeping them on track. It's making actual measurable things, right? Coaching on who they're being as well, on the level of consciousness. Spiritual teacher is literally, it's not about me, it's just their spiritual teachings. And the transition I made was before, when I was doing NLP and hypnotherapy, it was because of my shadow stuff. I wanted to be special. I didn't want to be dull, I always wanted to be special. That was a big thing. One way I found to be special was to do NLP and hypnotherapy, and especially conversational hypnotherapy, which is using mind-bending language, interesting syntaxes, so mixing up certain words. Like even when I said I would find you being okay with being dull quite interesting. That's kind of a use of words that become quite hypnotic to people, makes you smart, right? So and by doing that, I was the performer. I was the special one on some level. I had a lot of care for my clients, but it was more people would go away and they'd go, that was the best thing I've ever, he was amazing. He was the most interesting person in the room. But that took away all the power. And it was a little bit like a Tony Robbins effect. Yeah, he can really help you change, but what happens when you leave him? So I started to realize as I did my own work that there were some shadow parts in there. And as I released them, I realized I was making it more about what I could do for them and not empowering them as much. The trauma stuff's great, right? But for longer, bigger vision stuff, I want them to get to a place where they don't need me, at least in that vision. And then maybe they pick a new, bigger vision and they're like, holy shit. And then they need my help again to get them to that place. So the shift was away from me being the star and helping them, but then them needing me in some sense, to me coaching and talking about spiritual tenets that are very important. Letting go, surrender, this will pass. It is what it is, whatever language you want to use. We're all connected, more lovingness, open your heart. So it really embeds into them. And there might not be as many fireworks at times externally, but actually, and this is a question you asked me before the podcast, is what creates like significant long-lasting change. We can talk about that in a minute. It is, we come back to them making small strategic steps consistently so that it creates a huge impact within themselves. They don't need me anymore. So that was a shift from me focused to them focused. And that third space focus, where I'm present, they're present, I'm loving, they're loving, I'm committed, they're committed. And what happens in that third space? Something really fucking cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I can attest to that. That deep work is a big deal. And the coaching thing, like I love doing it, but often the first stuff that comes up is our inner shit. Like it's always mindset first. No matter what business I'm helping someone, launch or get their brand together or whatever we're working through, it's always perspective and mindset first. It's the foundation of how we're looking at things. And I knew that firsthand for working with you and starting to look at things differently. It was massive, especially the ownership part. I'm curious, what are some of like other your favorite books that you've gone through? Because I just love when I get a new read.
Yeah. Something interesting that you said is I feel like there's this big puzzle, which is reality. And it starts off pretty empty. Or we start off with the wrong pieces. We're given the wrong pieces by society, by culture. And then we take some of those pieces out. It's the inner work, right? And then our coach or these books we have, that I'll mention in a minute, they give us pieces that actually fit. They're more apt and correct to what reality is. And so I'm talking about NLP, I'm talking about hypnotherapy, I'm talking about more spiritual stuff. You know, you have different ways you do it. Everyone does. They all have their place and they're all a piece to the puzzle. All roads lead to Rome. So we're talking about the same thing effectively. It just depends where you're at and what resonates with you too. And so I love reading different books, having different teachers, Western, Eastern, Middle Eastern, men, women, old, young, everything. So that I have more pieces to connect to and build the picture of the same thing we're all moving towards, the picture of Rome, as it were. Some great books. So Dr. Sarno, Healing Back Pain, I think it's called. I'd highly recommend that.
Just for back pain?
So I would say any physical ailment.
Okay.
Any physical ailment.
I have lots of those, so that sounds great.
Yeah, he'll really help.
Okay.
And he was legit. I mean, he was I forget the word now, but worked with spine and bone and things like that at a very prestigious hospital in America for about 35 years. Then he started to realize certain patients weren't healing, and he started to look into the more emotional component relating to the body. So he had that scientific background, and so he was great. Another book I've just finished is The Surrender Experiment.
Yep.
Also, people probably know The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. And that's really resonated and helped me through some pretty tough family times recently, just to surrender into it. Letting Go by David R. Hawkins. Beautiful book. Talks about the levels of consciousness that we could talk about, and just how to let go. So what I find is that where I used to be with NLP hypnosis to here, they're the same thing. They're the same. There's a road leading to Rome, you know, enlightenment, higher levels of consciousness. But what I'm always looking for is what is the quickest route? And just from my own experience, the quickest route is where I am now, and who knows where I get to, but it's more simply letting go and surrendering. But that does take, I think, time. I wasn't ready to do that. Now I feel I've got more to a place where my relationship with who I actually am, which is self-awareness, like that blue sky, I'm much closer and connected to that and less attached to ego, which means I can use the more simple, pure form, I feel, which is more meditation, more being present, coming back to experience, and then letting go of, as Rumi says, it's not our job to seek out love, but to seek out and remove all barriers we've built against it. And so my only job is simple now, and with my clients, is where's your barriers? Do you want to let them go? Let them go. And that's it.
I love that. That's beautiful. That's making me think of this shoulder injury I had when you're talking about the emotional part. And I tore my supraspinatus in my right shoulder, but it was during a really stressful time when I was back at home in Canada, and I was separating from this business I launched, this tattoo shop, and it was getting really ugly with my business partner's family. They were handling it me and my ex-business partner, we were at least civil, but we knew we had different management styles. We lived very different lifestyles, and it was a mistake to think I could kind of shift someone into being an entrepreneur if they didn't have the impetus, I guess, to do it. You know, they weren't wanting to really play ball, and maybe my management style was a bit too fast paced. We're different styles, right? But their family was the big brother was getting really aggressive with me and threatening me, wanting me to leave with nothing after a year, right? And so it was bringing up a lot for me, because it was like my childhood coming up where I was getting bullied by an older brown guy. So I was training to fight. I was going to kickboxing kickboxing about 2-3 days a week, training just in case something was going to happen, because it was threatening with violence. So I was like, okay, bring it. I had to go to an ugly place, and it was really a high stress situation. Lawyers, but also dealing with them being underhanded. And I went to go play a dodgeball game for like my ex-girlfriend. We're still good friends. She actually married one of my best friends back at home. I was gone for a long time, and they ended up together, and I'm super happy for them. So
you mentioned,
yeah, I remember this. Crazy. So I went to go play dodgeball for their team, and the first throw of the first game, I tear my shoulder. It was during that exact time, and I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Like it still aches to this day. And I was like, during an extremely heightened, stressful, high pressure situation, I like tear my shoulder. And I was in really good shape at the time. I did 75 hard. I was on phase 1 of 75 hard. I had just gotten through about 8 surgeries. And I was like in this machine mode of healing. So I was really good. And then it was like all the emotions were too much for me. And I like tear my shoulder. And then it's been a bit rocky since then to get into good shape, because I just kind of plagued with injuries. And I was just wondering how much of that was I not quite processing the stress and grief of a situation, though I felt I was doing the breath work and the meditation, doing the things, but it kept coming up. And then it kept waking me up in the middle of the night, or around 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. And we talked last week about this. And I was just like, man, I'd wake up that and just think about the situation. And it was just coming up for me. And I was like, what the fuck? Can I just let this go? Like I've acted accordingly. I fixed the situation as best as it was going to go, but there was this imprint of it psychologically that would just weigh on me. And I'm just asking you for some free coaching here, but it was just like,
I want to. I'm like,
I'm excited about this. It's like I couldn't let it go, and it just kept coming up for me. And I'm injured. My body's still injured from this. Like I'm trying to heal my shoulder, but it's still quite painful. And I'm getting a bit better the last couple of weeks. In the last week of just waking up at 4 a.m. anyways, and I'm up and then getting myself back to sleep and trying to not ruminate on different negative situations I'm dealing with that currently that are stressful, business stuff, whatever, this, that, the past. What is that all about? What's this replay loop of rumination, and what's the connection, of course, healing the body and getting injured at a critical stress time?
So to use what the book says, Dr. Sano, he talks about in simple terms that the mind hijacks a moment. So there's all these suppressed emotions, and especially if there's danger that they might, repressed or suppressed, if they might come up, which is what was going to happen, I think, in my situation when I was a young dad, he says that the mind doesn't want that to happen because it doesn't want to accept, a part of it doesn't want to accept. So what it does is when you get injured, when you have a moment where you could have got injured, or maybe you did have an injury, it hijacks it and gets you to focus on that thing rather than the unaccepted shadow parts of yourself and the emotions that are connected to that. So what he talks about is, he says, don't look at it anatomically. Look at it, he uses the word psychologically. You could use energetically, emotionally. So you could ask yourself, what am I not accepting about myself right now in this moment that could relate to that? You could even look at it as a metaphor. The unconscious mind likes to use a metaphor. Bad back. I can't take the weight. My back is crumbling. So it literally gives me a bad back. So even your shoulder, it's your right shoulder, right? So start to just get really curious and present. I don't know if we do it now. It might be a little bit slow for a podcast. But just get really curious about what is it emotionally or psychologically. And then don't answer it with the intellect. Slow down. Close your eyes or stare off. Go into a trance. And then just leave space. Like you're dropping the question into like a still pool of water. And then just see what comes up. And just like when I was on that edge of the bed and just letting go, not grabbing hold of anything, memories might come. And inner wisdom might come. Maybe memories or a belief you've created. And that would be the clearest road to Rome, to understand what's happening to you. I'm not saying that there aren't injuries, of course there are. But especially if it's something that's chronic, why is it chronic? You're not an old guy, It should heal. And unless you're really like fucking it up again and again, So that might be something to look at. But if you're not really doing anything crazy and it's still not healing and it gets triggered very quickly, I would start to think maybe it's psychological and emotional, and sit with those questions and see what arises.
Thank you for that.
Does that, what do you hear? Does it resonate?
100%. Because it was coming around. Did I feel like a failure? Like I launched a business, but it wasn't the right chemistry with the team. And so ultimately I felt like I failed because I exited. I didn't want to have any part in it, but ultimately it was a bad business decision in the sense. It looked good on paper, but then when the actual characters played out, it wasn't a good fit.
Wasn't the right decision.
Yeah, it
wasn't the right decision, right?
Yeah, wasn't the right decision.
Who knows?
And I feel like there's a lot there with like manhood and earning and money, and just like all these things. Like, are you good enough? Are you man enough? Are you doing these things? And it just weighs, and it's on your shoulders. It's weight to carry on your shoulders. And so I feel like that can be a lot of pressure. Could see it in that space. Whereas if things didn't work out the way I wanted them to, or I'd hoped them to, or the best case situation, then I'm beating myself up about it. I feel like it could be a similar situation, as well as, not wanting to be taken advantage of is what I felt like I was taken advantage of. So that feeling of me being made felt small or something to that effect, like I'm getting the bad end of the stick on this deal is what I felt like by the end of it. It was a waste of a year of my time, and that's kind of what I felt like it kind of boiled down to. On the positive end, I was handicapped and I launched 2 businesses, actually 3 technically counting this place, while I was handicapped. So I'm like, pretty fucking good. So
pretty fucking good.
Yeah, pretty decent, yeah, but yeah, I think I can still always, in that sense, I was finding reasons like my body wasn't taking it. I was pushing too hard maybe, and then being too hard on myself. I think that was kind of where it was boiling down to a little bit, but it was also extreme levels of stress. Those are like really difficult situations to deal with that simultaneously while trying to heal your body. So it was a lot at once, But I think sitting with it more and really looking into those situations is going to be the route moving forward. And I feel really inspired after talking to you about that, and I'm really excited to have you on the show and for people to get to connect with you and to get more of your wisdom. I just want to thank you so much for coming through and being such an amazing role in my life, really. Like, thank you so much for all the help that you've been there for me so many times. And it's just invaluable. So thank you.
Thank you, brother.
How can people find you? How can they connect with you? How can they work with you?
Sure. You can find me at richmaule.com or Instagram, Richard Maule. And if they want to work with me, how I work is to predominantly through relationships. So reach out, be authentic, share something about yourself, and if we connect, we'll talk more.
Amazing. Yep. And if you found some value in this, please DM us on Instagram. Let us know how you liked the podcast, what you resonated with. And if you found Rich through me, let him know. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear about it. I'd be happy to hear that one of our people became his people. Thank you so much for coming to this episode of the Ink, Pray, Love podcast. And we'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ink, Pray, Love podcast. I hope you found it inspiring, entertaining, funny, and also feeling a little bit more present and connected to yourself. Please leave a review and like and subscribe and do all those things. I'd really appreciate that. As well as if you're feeling in a giving mood, this podcast is there for the charities that I love to support. Go to www.arenbaya.com/charity and get some of those good karma points. This podcast is brought to you by LightHouse Studios in Bali, as well as Full Reset Coaching. That is my coaching practice. And if you're looking for help in business, inner game impact, and building your legacy to be something you're proud of, your brand, your business, and how you walk the earth and who you impact, and also having the mindset and the heart set to be able to be happy handling it all, I'm here for you. Just DM me. Let's go. Peace out, homies. I'll see you on the next episode.